Hey, read through the word. Today is October 8th. At least I think it is. Yes, it's October 8th. And today's lesson is called Goals. So before I start lesson, I do want to thank you so much for my lesson from October 3rd, where everybody was praying for me. And I got text on October 5th, which I told y'all was the day. And I got messages and comments and prayers, and I really appreciate it. It was a very hard day. I ended up in bed pretty early that night, and but thank you so much for your prayer. I did a lot of Bible reading, praying, and singing that day, so that helps. So thank you so much. I do appreciate it. That's why we're family here. So thank you so much. So today we are continuing. I told you my goal is, now I'm trying to stick with the Matthew text when I get to it. When I'm teaching, I'm trying to stick with Matthew. I think I've got one day in the next week or so where it might actually, it's in the next few days actually, where I'm going to go into John. But mainly I'm trying to stay in the book of Matthew. And as we're building this idea of kingdom. And so that's what we're looking at today. So let's take a look at this lesson. And it is, let's see. We're in Matthew chapter 10, verse 25. That says this. In your lesson, I think I used ESV. It's not the New Living. It says this: it is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. So, we're in Matthew. So remember the text and what our goal is, this idea of a king and a kingdom. Now, Jesus has, through word and deed, has made himself known. And now what we see is the nation. So you're going to see steps that Jesus takes, and I'm trying to help you pay attention to that in your reading, because you might not notice it. So I'm here to help you see these steps that Jesus takes to as we see his ministry change. So right now, his ministry is to the nation. And so the king has made himself known, and now the nation would know about the kingdom. So the nation of Israel, politically it would have been called Judea at the time, but as we'll look at, the lost sheep of Israel in the next few days. But what Jesus does is he sent out his messengers with the news of the kingdom. We call them his disciples. And the disciples were to go to announce that the kingdom of heaven is near. They were to make the kingdom known in word and deed, just like we've seen Jesus through word and deed. Because what happens is they were to make known the kingdom by acting in authority of the king. They were to affect the world for the king. That was the goal. This is all about kingdom. What they do, you get the list of the disciples as their and then you see that Jesus sends them out in authority and tells them to go and do these things. He tells them to preach. He tells them to cast out demons. He tells them to heal. And they go and they do all of these things. And then they are to come back to him. And then it says that in that verse, we'll pull it back up. When you're looking later in chapter 10, verse 25, when you're looking, he gives them specific rules to be sent out, to be those who are sent out for the sake of the kingdom, and to make the kingdom known and make the way to the kingdom. So you see that the New Living Translation says, students are to be like their teacher. And then he says, he gives them very detailed instructions and and things they need to remember, like where to stay, what to do when people don't receive them, who they're to go talk to. He gives them all of these things. Even tells them like how much clothes to carry and all of these. I mean, just read the details that Jesus gives them. So what I want us to look at is what we're seeing. Jesus is making disciples, and then we're going to see and talk about in the next few days as we look at specifically the text in Matthew, but you see the other gospels as they complete the story altogether. You see some more details added. But through Matthew, with the understanding of what Matthew's trying to teach us, and Matthew's trying to tell us about Jesus. So right here in Matthew chapter 10, you're seeing the disciples and what Jesus is going to do with the disciples, knowing that they are the ones that he's going to leave in charge. And he knows that. They don't know yet. They don't get this yet. I had a friend of mine who always called them the disciples because they never really got it. And like, duh, didn't you get that? So because they don't, until after his resurrection, do they understand what they're supposed to be doing. So at this point, this whole idea of disciples and what a disciple does. So I want us to take what we're seeing with the disciples and remember that they are supposed to go do in word and deed, because there is no written word at that time. Because remember, the deeds authenticate the message. We don't have that because we have completed the whole counsel of God. I've been teaching in my Bible class at school about inspiration of Scripture, the canon, how we ended up with the books, how we know they've been preserved, all of this, the reliability of New Testament Scriptures, and looking at all these charts and everything about how we know. They didn't have that. They didn't have that. They had the message of Jesus that he had already preached. So we saw Jesus in word and deed. So now we'll watch his disciples go out in word and deed, because they didn't have the written word before them. So Jesus gives them the authority to perform miracles to authenticate the message that they had, so people would know to listen to them. So as we see that happen, I want us to take it and think about now, about us. What do we do with this text when we look at what does it mean for, remember, what does this tell us about God? This tells us about God, that God has a plan and we're part of it. That what does this tell me about my need for a savior? I can't do things in my own authority. That all of this is geared towards Jesus and the plan and the goal. So what does this mean for us right now? What does this mean for me as a member of the bride of Christ, a member of the church? What does this, how do we take, so here's this. I think many times now, I've grown up in the church. That's all I've known. Now, some of you have heard my testimony about, and we'll talk about it another day, but thinking I was a good girl and all these things. But so I've grown up with the idea of church. And I think I experienced in the church I was raised in, this idea of your end goal is salvation. And once you get that, you're good. But that's not what we see in the Bible. And that's not what we see later in the Gospels after the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. At his ascension, he gives us our marching orders, what we're supposed to be doing. But we see that played out here too as far as disciples. So God's goal for the church is not salvation. That's like not the end game. That's not the end goal. That's the beginning. His goal is that those who are saved become disciples. So in your notes, you have this nice definition that I got from Dr. Tony Evans. It says this: discipleship, the developmental process that progressively brings Christians from spiritual infancy to spiritual maturity so that they are then able to reproduce the process in someone else. To grow spiritually as a disciple of Christ means that we become like him. That's what we see with these disciples. He gives them his authority and they become like him in word and deed in what they do to preach forth the kingdom of heaven. And so what our goal is not, salvation is the beginning. That's why we're here together. That's why we do what we do. That's why this is my passion. That's why this is Wendy's passion. We are about disciple making. That's what we do. We grow and grow and grow into the likeness of Christ, until we have the mind of Christ, until we put him on, like Colossians tells us and Ephesians tells us. That's what we are. But that's what we're all supposed to be doing for other people. So I think sometimes we can get so that's, oh yay, they got saved, we're good. That's the beginning. To grow spiritually as a disciple of Christ, remember, means we become like him. Becoming a disciple is our goal. Then what does a disciple do? They turn around and they make other disciples. What is discipleship? Discipleship, I would say discipleship is the passion of my life. What I consider us doing here is discipleship. I do discipleship with middle school students. I do discipleship with high school students. I do discipleship with adults. I consider my call is to equip the church for kingdom work. What's kingdom work? Making disciples. We make disciples. That's what we do. What does that look like? Exactly what we're doing here. We learn, we grow, we become more like Jesus. And then we turn around and tell, like some of you, when we talked about this at our Determined conference back in the summer, I talked about this. I said, we think we have to have crowds of people to make disciples. One other person. It's done one-on-one. It's done one by one. That's what discipleship is. We take what we learn here and go tell one other person. Go help someone else in their process. Go help someone else on this discipleship journey, because it never ends until we stand face to face with the Lord. This discipleship journey never ends. Salvation is the beginning. And then it's a journey there. So what I hope we see is that the goal is to be a disciple and turn around and make more. That's what he called us to do. And we'll talk more about that when we get towards the end of the Gospels. So we'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.